Now, the medical factors that cause autism may still be unknown, but scientists are still trying to find those elusive answers. And one study found that there may be a link between a pregnant woman's weight and whether or not her baby is at greater risk to develop the disorder. Can a mother's weight increase the likelihood that their child will be born with autism? An alarming new study says maybe, but some experts are skeptical. The study from the University of California, Davis, looked at more than 500 autistic children in California and compared them to the same number of children who did not have autism. Researchers found that the risk of autism and other development delays was 60% higher among those born to mothers who were obese, hypertensive, or diabetic. The CDC estimates that 1 in 88 American children now has autism. That's up from 1 in 110 children in 2006. Obesity is also on the rise here in the U.S., affecting more than 1/3 of all American adults. But medical experts, including the authors of the study, say there may not be enough information just yet to say whether the two are connected. The bottom line for moms-to-be?
If you really want to give your kid the best start in the world, and I'm sure every mom in the world wants that for their child, then you just have to pay very careful attention to your own health.
More than $1 billion has been spent on autism research in the past decade, and there's still obviously so many unanswered questions. But to help us try and at least address them, we're going to bring in now Dr. Michael Ellis. He's been a pediatrician for more than 30 years, and he now focuses his work on treating children with autism spectrum disorder. Doctor, thank you for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Before we get into obesity and some of the other potentially contributing factors, when the CDC report came out and basically the language surrounding it is epidemic, I'm curious your reaction. You say it's about time, or did you say, well, you know what, they're lumping so many moving things into one thing, we may be getting attention, but it may be confusing the issue?
Actually, I agree with the term epidemic. I think that if you lump all of the possible diseases, including childhood cancer, in one lump, that there are more children being called autistic now than all of those diseases would account for in the general population. So clearly something is going on. It's been going on and with increasing frequency in the last 30 years or so. And what people who are doing the medical research and clinicians like me are trying to figure out is what has been going on over the last 30 years that is somewhat different, that seems to be changing the nature of the population of our children. And in fact, there are many adults now who are being labeled as autistic because they sort of slipped under the radar. Nobody knew what to call them years ago. But this is not exactly a new problem, but it's definitely getting worse.
I also want to get into another question, which has been the subject of age. Efforts to find, the root of autism, as everybody can attest to, whether, you have a loved one with it or not, are beyond elusive. It's to some almost maddening. Another study finds there could be a connection between the age of a father and the likelihood that his child may be autistic. Autism is one of medicine's greatest puzzles. Another piece was found recently, a piece about autistic children with dads older than 30, men like Ray Siegel, age 54.
We first noticed something was going on with our son because he had a pretty large vocabulary, seltzer, taxi, bagel, and over a period of time, he lost those words.
Ray's two sons, Oscar and Hugo, were each diagnosed with autism in early childhood. It's possible their autism is connected to changes that happened in their dad's genetic material.
These spontaneous mutations are probably more often inherited, at least in autism, from dad, and maybe a little more common in older dads.
Dads who are over 50 when compared to dads under 30 have twice the risk of having an autistic child. And this study may help explain why, pointing out spontaneous genetic glitches connected directly to autism. Medicine already knows that older parents, moms and dads, have a higher risk of having kids with Down syndrome, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder. The older the parents, the greater the risk. Of course, Ray and his wife don't know what caused their son's autism. If anyone knew, this devastating syndrome would be easier to treat.
Let's figure out if autism is one thing or if it's many different things. Let's figure out if there's a genetic factor, if there's an environmental factor.
Another piece of the puzzle with so many more to go. You know, doctor, you hear that father at the end. They just want answers. And you must see that when you close the door in your office and you sit down with parents, and one of the first questions must be why. Is it something we did? Is it our age? Is it our DNA trail that we passed on to our child? Is that one of the most prevalent questions before what to do next? Why?
Oh, absolutely. But one of the most important things when you do the intake is to take a good family history to find out what are the genetic patterns, what are the risks for other diseases in the family, how old is the father now, how old was the mother, what was the age of conception, how many miscarriages or pregnancies did the mother have before this child, was the child fine, and then seemingly, as they stated in that piece, that the child wasn't fine anymore. What are the connections between other mental disorders like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, because most autistic children seem to have a lot of those same characteristics which manifest as their behaviors. So it's really taking a good family history, and then of course there are certain tests that can be done to look for those genetic glitches that Dr. Insel referred to in the piece to figure out where the mistakes might happen. The one thing that we've learned is that our genetic information as it occurs at the time of conception is not set in stone, that there are what we call epigenetic or environmental factors that can alter that. It happens to each of us every single day. So the program you may have started out with at the time of conception can be altered in utero, and even once you become a living human being, that will change the way you respond to various triggers in the environment.
If one thing I've gotten very clear from you is medicine plays a role with this. It's not just treating this as a psychiatric disorder, but there's a lot of, as you said, contributing factors, but also, you know, medicine's got to play a role in this thing too.
That's true. In pediatrics, in my practice, I started to see changes in children about 10, 12 years ago, and whether it was bizarre behaviors, whether we called it autism or attention deficit disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder, whatever, it seemed to me that none of these children were ever really that healthy. They had other things that we accept. Oh, children get ear infections, they have asthma, they have diarrhea, constipation, and so forth. But it seemed like the majority of the kids that were having these so-called mental or developmental problems were also clinically having other medical problems as well. And the question was asked, and it's trying to be answered by people who are doing a lot of this research around the world, is what are the connections between the kids who seem to have, for example, all kinds of gastrointestinal problems. About 80% of autistic children have gastrointestinal issues. But we accept it because everybody's constipated. Well, you know, we're not supposed to be constipated. That's not the way our bodies work. So there's a lot of these comorbid, if you will, medical scenarios that can be contributing to the kid's behavior by changing biochemical pathways, or basically the way our bodies are supposed to work.
So if you're going to harness the awareness of the public and transition that into some real public health, not just awareness, but action, what would you hope it would look like?
So this isn't one drug fits all, one therapy fits all. The kind of things that are offered academically and in educational support services, extremely important. But without the biochemistry and without the biomedical interventions that can be done to figure out what else is throwing these kids off the track, you may not be as successful. And that can also speak to why some kids just do better with certain therapies than others. You have to ask the question. Unfortunately, the medical community at large is not really that open-minded to asking those questions because it's not the way we were taught to think so much.
All right, Dr. Ellis, very good stuff.